verse 7. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem, Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan, and from around Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. So just picture this. This is what's going on. You have people coming from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, Tyre, Sidon, right? There's these huge groups coming. And now it's like these two groups converge. And there are so many people. Jesus tells his disciples, get a boat ready, because this many people, in fact, the text is going to say, and it says, they're falling on him. They were falling on him, which is a neat parallel, because it says the people were falling on him because they were trying to touch him, right? They were wanting to be healed, and they're falling on him. And you know what it says about the unclean spirits are falling before him. And all this displays that Jesus is the Son of God, right? So this you see this pattern, and I've told you this pattern. I'm going to tell you this pattern again. Is all through Mark. Authority, awe, and adversity. This is the way it works. You see Jesus' authority, you see people in awe of him, and then you see the adversity. Right? You can see this pattern all the way through. Read the book of Mark this week and just look for Jesus' authority, people being put in awe of him, and then adversity. And even in the midst of Pharisaical adversity, notice here, the crowds are still going to him, right? Here the Pharisees, they're coming to their conclusion about him. They say, how can he say you can be forgiven of sins, right? Back in chapter 2. And they're asking these questions. Why are you fasting? Or no, that wasn't, why are you hanging out with these hoodlums? Right? Yeah, they asked the disciples, right? There's these questioning. Questioning is starting to end. They're now plotting adversity, and yet the crowds are still in awe. They're swarming to Jesus. And yet the authority of Jesus threatens the leaders and still amazes the crowds. And both the crowds, now get this, if you don't know this, let this sink in. Both the crowds and the Pharisees are adverse elements to Jesus. The crowds are adverse elements to Jesus. We usually think, oh, crowd's a good thing, right? More people. We want more people, right? That's not Jesus' philosophy wasn't that. The crowds, most of the time, as you read the Gospels, are obstacles to Jesus' ministry, to where people start spreading the news about him and he can't enter a town anymore. So realize that these are adverse elements, both the Pharisees and the crowds. And the people are falling on him, and the unclean spirits are falling before him. And the unclean spirits, get this, are actually confessing what the Pharisees will not acknowledge. You see the genius of Peter explaining this to Mark in this book. He's got the demons confessing that Jesus is the Son of God, both here and earlier in chapter 1, with the Pharisees denying who he is all the way through. So these crowds were so large and so crazy that Jesus says, get a boat ready in case we need to use it. And it doesn't ever say whether they used it or not. I mean, in this gospel, it doesn't say whether they used it or not. But I just thought about this when he said this to the disciples. I thought, do you and I have resources ready for Jesus to use? Do you see needs in other people's lives and decide, you know what? I want to meet that need. I think Jesus would want to meet that need. Are your resources available for Christ? As he asked these disciples to have a boat ready for him. So what you have in this passage are two distinct groups. You have disciples and you have the crowds. The crowds are around Jesus and the disciples are with Jesus. In other words, because you're in the vicinity of Jesus doesn't mean you're following him. Just because you're at church doesn't make you a Christian. It's like if you're in the garage doesn't make you a car. Right? You may be falling on Jesus for help without following Jesus. And these next passages are going to show us who's in and who's out. as we look at these next passages, ask yourself the question, am I in with Jesus? Am I following Jesus? Or am I just in the vicinity of Jesus, getting what I want from him, falling on him for help, and conforming Jesus to what I want him to be? Because that's what these people do. So look at verse 13. And he went up on a mountain and called to him those he desired, and they came to him, and he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him and might be sent out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. He appointed 12. I won't go into the whole list at this point. But Jesus goes up on a mountain. I want to point this out to you. There's a pattern in Scripture and in Mark about mountains. Remember, the first time mountain is used in the Bible, you know what it is? It's the greatness of God's flood. Let me show you how great this flood is, God says. It went above the highest mountain. In other words, there was enough water to cover the highest mountain. Now, today we know there's not enough water to cover the highest mountain. We understand that. But in that day, there was. And so the highest mountain was covered, and that was God saying, this is how great the flood is. There's no land, right? That's his point. The next, I think it is the next, I think it's the next one. The next one is take your son, your only son, to the mountain and sacrifice him, showing the greatness of the sacrifice of a son. Exodus says, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people Israel. And then later in Exodus 20, now when all the people saw the thunder and the lightning flashing and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood afar off and said to Moses, you speak to us, and we'll listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die. Mountains in the Bible can be places of revelation. And you see a pattern in this. Wasn't that a revelation right there with what Moses, right? Moses goes up to the mountain, brings down the 10 Commandments. The smoke on the mountain is a revelation of God. In fact, in Mark, we'll just look at a couple passages in Mark. In Mark, mountains are places of the revelation from God. And as he sat on the mountain, the Mount of Olives, opposite the temple, Peter, James, and John, and Andrew asked him privately, tell us when these things will be. And so they're asking Jesus for further revelation. And Jesus says, see that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and they will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place. Whatever's happening now in our culture, this must take place. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines. These are but the beginning of birth pains. So this is Jesus now, sitting on a mountain, revealing the future to these men. They asked. Another time he's on the mount, this is Mark 14, Jesus says to them, you will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. And then the cool one. Here's the coolest one. Okay, this is a really good one. I love this passage. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. They're up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. Do you see? God reveals himself. He's revealing himself in his Son. That's who God revealed. You want to know what God's doing in your life? Look at the Son. Look at Christ. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses. Elijah, the greatest Old Testament prophet. Moses, the lawgiver. The law and the prophets are on the mountain with Jesus. And the disciples are like, out of their mind, right? They're blown away by this. And Peter says to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Now, here's the funny part. He says that. Now, who's behind the writing of Mark? Peter is, right? Peter's telling this to Mark, right? So think about this for a minute. Peter says that I said this to Jesus, that it's good that we're here, let's make 3 tents. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And then Peter says, for he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. In other words, I said a really stupid thing on the mountain, in one sense. I was trying to be biblical because tabernacles are biblical, right? And they're places of worship, and that's all good. But I didn't know what I was saying. And the reason he didn't know what he was saying is because of what happened next. A cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out from the cloud. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus. What's the point? You don't dare put my son on the same level as Moses and Elijah. Right? That's his point. That's his revelation. He's constantly revealing Christ. That's who God reveals. He reveals Christ. Not only were mountains places of revelation, they were also places where God sends his people on mission. Did you know that? I didn't know that. I thought that was really interesting. I was looking these verses up for mountains, and here we read, now when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples and said, go to the village in front of you, right? He sends them to get a mule. He sends them. And then he does it again. Now the 11 went to Galilee, to the mountain, this is Matthew, to the mountain which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. What's he going to do? He is going to say, make disciples. He sends out his people. As you go, you make disciples. But see, here's the key thing. I want our church to be a disciple-making church. I want us to be a church where we disciple one another. But the key thing, the most important thing, the prerequisite for you making disciples is you being with Jesus. And I don't mean, okay, I'm with Jesus. Yeah, I know, I'm saved. No. I mean, this week, have you spent time alone with Jesus? That you know what he has, there's things this week that you knew from that time of prayer that you were to do, that you were to believe, that your disposition changed because you were really with Jesus and you know what he wants you to do. Do you have that? You have those times during the week? I really hope you do. Because that is the prerequisite to making disciples. You must be with Jesus. I mean, we see this in every case. In fact, lastly, mountains are places of communion with God. Listen to this. And after Jesus had taken leave of them, he went up on a mountain to pray. And in Luke's parallel account with our passage, getting back to our passage, in these days he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose from them 12, whom he named apostles. Is Jesus our example? Yeah, he's much more than that. He's our example. He is our example. And in this example, what's he do in order to choose the 12? He spends all night in prayer. I can make you a promise. You spend that much time praying, God will show you who you should disciple. And you got to remember this. Discipleship is different. In fact, you're going to see this. In fact, this is where we're going next. So I'm right on my thought line here. You know how people choose colleges today, right? The way they choose a college is they look who the teachers are, right? I'm picking this college because I want to be under that teacher to teach that subject. That's typically the way it goes. Colleges don't call you. I mean, maybe they do, but not typically. Jesus is doing something that is other than his culture even at that time. And that is, he's choosing followers. Rabbis did not choose their followers. Followers chose their teachers. followers chose their rabbis. Jesus chooses his disciples. So why do I tell you that? For those of you who have been walking with God for a significant length of time, and you're wondering why I haven't discipled anybody, why aren't you discipling someone, why aren't you bringing someone along in the faith? You need to choose someone and pray for someone like that. A wise man asked me the other day. He said, "So when you expect us to make disciples, as the Bible says, do you assign us people who we should disciple, or is it natural? Is it just like a natural relationship?" And I said, well, it's actually a supernatural relationship, because the first thing you want to do is you want to pray for God to bring you the right person that you could pour your life into. You want Jesus to appoint that. You want to be praying about that. You want to be asking God, who do you want me to be pouring my life into? Because you want his direction in it. And is it natural? It should be. If you don't like the person you're discipling, then you need your heart changed. Right? I mean, you should like the person. You should be transparent with the person. You should want to be with that person. You should pursue that person. And let me just say this. Our church has new believers in it. Did you know that? Are you a new believer? And if your answer is no, do you know who the new believers are, and are you pursuing them? What are you doing? Are you coming alongside some new believers and encouraging them? Are you saying edifying things to them? Are you texting them? Are you emailing them? Are you encouraging them? Are you wanting them to see Christ? You know, I think sometimes people think the church grows when we get visitors. Visitors usually are strangers, right? They're strangers until they're no longer strangers, but they're strangers. So our church can grow a number of ways. One of the ways our church could grow is that people who we don't know come, and then we look to be with them, other than on Sunday. That's called the beginnings of discipleship. You try to develop relationships. That's one way. I would prefer, here's the way I would prefer, and God can do it either way, and he does it either way. He doesn't have to do it my way. But I prefer that the people here who are here already start bringing people who they love and who love them, and who those people have seen Christ in these people, and they want to worship with them. I look at that and I say, that's ideal. Because that's what you see in Acts, don't you? Don't you see that in Acts? Is Acts about bring people to church, or is Acts about go? Right? You see the difference? Interesting. So understand, discipleship. Jesus is about to give you a very clear, simple definition of discipleship here. And these huge crowds, so just get into the mind of the disciples for a minute. All these people just about knocked Jesus into the water a few minutes ago, right? And it's just crazy. There's so many people. This is kind of like the lesson of Adam and Eve. Remember, Adam gets created and he goes around naming all the animals, and what's he see? They're all in pairs. And he's got no partner, right? Here in this chaos, in this all these people pushing in and all these people coming, the huge crowds are a lesson for the disciples that maybe if Jesus could give some authority to his disciples and send them out, the kingdom could be displayed in more places. And maybe that's the picture of what the church is going to be.